I mean, they're just in numbers that are almost difficult to fathom. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands per emission. So there are vast numbers of them, but only one sperm and one egg. I don't know if that hits the question you're asking. Yeah, how? Yeah, the whole capacitation step, everything has to be just right. You think of the number of places things could go wrong. You know, I'll just remind you again, Michael Behe makes a big thing out of irreducible complexity. He said if you don't have this irreducible complexity, the evolutionists can always say, well, a simpler system could have sufficed. But you look at this system here, and it's like lockstep. If you don't do step A, you don't get a chance to do B. And if you don't B, you can't do C. And if you don't do C, you can't do D. It's like Monopoly. Go to jail, go directly to jail. Do not pass goal, you're done. And to put all that together, and we've only, you know, we haven't even touched the surface. We just hit a couple things that I thought you might find interesting. Yeah.
When you were a professor, were you able to talk to your students like you had just, you know?
Okay, the question is, when I was a professor at the med school, was I able to talk in, you know, just the same way I do here? I did once a year. Once a year, I had an open invitation to all my students to come to my home. And we really kicked the gong around when they came to the house. Out of 120 students, I'd get 60 to 70 students every year. And if I'd forget to invite them, they'd come to me and say, are you having that get-together you had last year? And I would share my Christianity, and you know, when my wife died, which was while I was teaching there, I shared the problems of, you know, facing death, and that they would be dealing with life and death, and are they able to be of help to their patients and what have you. And I talked about creation and evolution. Now people say, well, did you have any impact? Well, some of these students were already Christians, and they did agree in main with what I had to share. Even those who visited my home, I would say most were still skeptical. But they respected me, so they came. One student I worked with, I can't tell you how much time I spent with him. I finally gave up on him. I said, you are absolutely hopeless. I mean, I tried to share the gospel. He would believe anything as long as it wasn't in the Bible. And so I finally just kicked him out of my office. 25 years later, I got a letter from this guy who's now a distinguished neurologist, and it began, Dear Dr. Menton, I just want you to know you have been irritating me for 25 years. Second sentence, I probably wouldn't have even mentioned this to you except, well, I've become a Christian now, and I want to thank you for irritating me for 25 years. So that's why I don't do altar calls. I figure it can be. But when I was giving a lecture, what I would do is I could give a lecture similar. In fact, some of these pictures are right out of my lectures from the med school. Quite a few of them are. I wouldn't bring in the Bible verses or talk about, you know, God's handiwork in creation or whatever. I would just give as insightful and exciting a lecture as I could possibly give on whatever I was talking about. Students used to do reviews. Each lecture, can you imagine, getting graded and written comments? I mean, we were only giving the students pass-fail, and they were grading us on a 40-point scale as a teacher. And I had a student once in his little comment saying, I distinctly saw Dr. Menton elevate off the stage about 4 inches during that lecture. I was getting excited. So the students knew I was a Christian because word gets around. That's not that common. And plus the people would come to my house, of course, that got around from that. So everybody knew I was a Christian. Everybody knew I was a creationist. So when I was teaching one organ or another in the body, I didn't have to beat them over the head and say, oh, and by the way, this requires a creator. I mean, intelligent design, when you think about it, is not something you teach. Intelligent design is something you notice. And this is where I don't know what the poor administrators in the American Civil Liberties Union are going to do. Because how do you keep the students from noticing intelligent design? All you have to do is give a good lecture. In fact, the only way to avoid having students notice intelligent design is to give like a really boring lecture, and then they don't notice. So, believe me, the students knew where my head was when I was talking about it. I didn't have to beat them over the head and say, oh, by the way, this requires a designer or whatever. And they would come into my office and talk, but I was careful not to use the lectern to actually teach scripture or whatever. And a lot of people lost their jobs doing about what I did. It's rough out there today. In fact, I don't know how much longer it'll be possible for a person, as I was, a known Christian, to be allowed in a medical school at all. I think those days are coming to an end. I don't think you're going to be allowed to attend a medical school if you believe in creation. I personally saw people rejected from our medical school class in one case because a letter of recommendation written by a professor from UCLA said, yes, this student was by far the best student in my class, which had 200-300 people in a general biology thing. He said, however, he belongs to a club that invited a creationist, it happened to be Dwayne Gish, on campus to debate one of our faculty here, and I suspect they're probably creationists, and if they're creationists, he would not be able to understand biology. This is after acing his class. And he was not admitted into the medical school that year. I pulled strings and he got in.